Deep in the South Pacific sits the Republic of Nauru, an isolated nation covering just 8 square miles. Despite its tiny footprint, by 1981, this island achieved something highly improbable. Its small population became the wealthiest group of citizens on Earth. This chart shows how dramatic that wealth really was. In 1981, the United States had a GDP per capita of around $14,000. The average citizen of Nauru, however, commanded a staggering $27,000. Sudden cash flooded the island, creating some deeply surreal situations. Residents began importing expensive sports cars like Lamborghinis, even though you can drive the entire perimeter of Nauru at a leisurely pace in roughly 1 hour. For a brief window in time, Nauru achieved the ultimate economic dream of high yields and effortless income, and then it all completely evaporated. This graph tracks Nauru's economic output over the following decades. After reaching that massive peak in the 1980s, the line drops almost vertically into the 2000s. It represents a total crash of more than 90%. At the very bottom of that trough, the country's central bank ran completely out of money. Unemployment spiked to 90%, and the local school system effectively collapsed. To survive today, the government relies almost entirely on renting out parts of its remaining land to host highly controversial offshore refugee detention centers for the Australian government. Economists classify this specific pattern as the natural resource curse, a scenario where sudden wealth from a single raw material destabilizes a country over the long run. Nauru serves as history's clearest autopsy of how striking it rich can ultimately hollow a nation out. Their initial wealth did not come from a lucky oil strike or veins of gold. The island was covered in centuries of accumulated seabird droppings and marine algae, which baked in the sun to form extremely high-grade phosphate ore. Because phosphate is a critical ingredient for global agricultural fertilizers, it was intensely valuable. This demand triggered decades of aggressive strip mining, orchestrated first by foreign colonial powers and eventually accelerated by the newly independent Nauruans themselves. Every functional economy relies on what economists call the factors of production. You need capital, you need labor, and you need physical land. Nauru had plenty of capital from their exports, but their labor pool was extremely small and highly unspecialized. Most critically, their actual physical land was being violently scraped out of the ground and shipped across the ocean. By physically exporting the very foundation of their island, they trapped themselves in an economic countdown they had no way to stop. They were experiencing a severe case of Dutch disease. This is an economic phenomenon where a massive boom in one natural resource artificially inflates currency and draws in all available capital, slowly suffocating every other domestic industry. On Nauru, the phosphate extraction physically destroyed the island's topsoil. When the excavators finished, they left behind a barren landscape of jagged coral limestone pinnacles, making domestic agriculture completely impossible. Without the ability to grow local crops or harvest fresh food, the population was forced into a total reliance on imported, cheap, processed canned goods. The dietary shift was devastating. By 2002, the World Health Organization ranked Nauru as the most obese nation on Earth, and severe health complications pushed the average life expectancy down to just over 60 years old. Dutch disease is typically thought of as a financial hazard. And Nauru, the inability to diversify their economy literally poisoned the population. By the 1990s, the math caught up with them. The phosphate reserves were rapidly approaching total depletion, and the government began to panic. Their first pivot was to sell economic citizenship and issue roughly 400 unregulated offshore banking licenses. Almost overnight, the island became a global haven for tax evasion and money laundering. The international backlash was swift and severe. Under the 2001 Patriot Act, the United States officially categorized Nauru as a rogue state, applying enough pressure to force the entire banking sector to shut down. They had also established a sovereign wealth fund, intended to safely invest their mining profits for the future. Instead, the fund was slowly drained by a long string of high-risk investments, bad real estate deals, and outright fraud. The ultimate symbol of this financial desperation was when the government lost millions of dollars backing a London theater musical. It was a poorly received production about a fictional love triangle involving Leonardo da Vinci. Lacking the foundational infrastructure to build actual sustainable industries, the state was backed into a corner, relying on increasingly irrational financial gambles just to keep the lights on. By 2001, the phosphate was entirely gone. The foreign investments had collapsed in failure, and the national treasury was completely empty. Out of options, Nauru accepted a deal from Australia, taking in millions of dollars in exchange for hosting offshore detention camps for intercepted asylum seekers. This arrangement stripped the island of its remaining autonomy. To stay afloat, Nauru became a client state, deeply tying its own economic survival to the shifting policies of its larger neighbor. Immense resource wealth operates as a trap unless a nation deliberately pairs it with sustainable economic diversification and the protection of its own physical environment. James Angjimia, an elderly minister born in 1911, lived through the entirety of the island's boom and bust. He remembered the island clearly before the heavy machinery arrived. He remembered a landscape that was lush and green, covered in trees that provided fresh coconuts and breadfruit for the community. Looking at the jagged wasteland left behind, he told a reporter he wept over the destruction of his home, wishing the phosphate had never been discovered in the first place. Nauru's autopsy leaves us with a stark economic reality. Selling the very ground you stand on is the fastest way to lose your future.